Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion App course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on imtimcorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short. It's time to style our application, make it start to look like a real web application. To do that, we're going to focus in on the file site.css. This is the place where we put all of our CSS and where we can override the bootstrap styles if necessary. Now, just so you know, you can in Blazor put styles behind an individual page. So for instance, we could put a style right behind create that would just apply to the create page. We're not going to do that because I have found that's of limited use. It's not for an everyday thing. We want to approach this like a real website where we want to reuse our styles whenever possible and have access to them broadly and have them in one spot. So we're going to use site.css for all of our changes. Now, site.css comes with some changes already in it. It has 64 lines of CSS in here that for the most part, we're going to leave alone. But we are going to do some tweaks. And the first tweak is that we're not going to use the base font, which is Helvetica Nueve. We're going to, or Nue, whatever that is, we're not going to use that. We're going to use our own, actually a fonts from Google Fonts. So let's open up Google Fonts. That would be fonts.google.com. If you're not familiar, these are fonts you can use on your website. They're open, they're usable, they're that you have permission to use them. Not all fonts are free. So don't just think that all fonts are free. They're not. And also, you need to use a font that the user has access to. So if I have a font installed on my machine, I could use it in development, but then when I go to deploy it, if it's not on the user's machine, they won't have access to it. So with these fonts, we can actually point to them and say, hey, here's the URL to get them, and then our users can have access to those same fonts. So let's start with Roboto. This is going to be our main font. And in here, we're going to make a number of choices for sizes. Notice there's 100, 300, 400, 500, 700, and 900. These numbers represent the weight of the lettering. Notice the thinnest letters are 100 and the thickest letters are 900. So we're going to choose the 300. We're going to say select light 300 and light 300 italic. We're also going to choose 400s and 700s. So both the regular and italic 400, as well as the bold 700 and bold 700 italic. Now, with this, notice in the right-hand side, we have this thing that says link. We can also choose import. We're going to choose import and grab this import statement right here, not the style tags, just the import statement, and we'll hit copy. Then we will come back to here on line 2, we'll paste in that URL. And notice it's a little long here, but this is now the font for Roboto. That's one of the fonts we're going to choose. We're going to choose one more though. So let's go back to here. We can clear out of this Let's remove all. And then we can go back to the main page. We're going to scroll down here and find Montserrat. You can also search for these, by the way, but they're on the main pages. They're pretty standard fonts that we're using. We're not using anything crazy here. So for this, we don't need the light and the medium. We want to start all the way down in bold, the 700s, bold and italic. And we also want the 900s, bold and italic. I don't think we actually need the italic of the 900, but I'm going to grab it just in case because it's better to have it at this point and not need it. Later, we can trim down if we decide we don't need it. Again, grab that import statement, copy it, and then paste it in here. So this is the first step. We've imported 2 different fonts with multiple weights for each font. But now we have to actually use it. So right here we have, for the HTML and body, we have font family of Helvetica Neue, and how do you say that? And Helvetica is a fallback, and Arial is a fallback of that, and then sans serif. We're going to change all of this except for the sans serif fallback, and we're going to say Roboto. So that is now the primary font for HTML in our body, and if for whatever reason we're not finding it, we can fall back to sans serif. We also want to mark that the font size is 18 pixels. And this will set our root font to be, root size to be 18 pixels. And for the most part, we're going to use rems to have a size based upon that root size. That way we can change this 18 pixels to something else, and it will change all the fonts on our site and other sizes as well. So that's the choice we're going to make there to have that root size. And then we're going to create an entry here for H1, H2. Notice the commas in between. They're very important. Basically, all of our headers. And we're going to say font family is Montserrat, and that should be inside single quotes, and then sans serif as the backup. You should always have a fallback to a system font, which is either serif or sans serif. All right, font weight. By default, the font weight is going to be 900 for these, and the color is going to be white. So that's the all Fs there. Now, we could just put 3 Fs here. We could also use lowercase. The problem is I'm going to copy and paste from a color picker, and that always does uppercase. So I'm just going to follow that convention throughout everything. So that now says that by default, all of our headings will have the Montserrat font. They'll be of weight 900, and they'll have the white color. Now, I'm going to have a background for our body. So background is going to be a URL, and in here it's going to be /images. Notice the dot goes up 1 level, and here's why. If you go to Solution Explorer, we're in site.css, which is inside the CSS folder. But where are images? They're at the same level as the CSS folder. So since we're inside this folder, we have to go up 1 level to www.root and then go down 1 level into images. That's why we're doing the up and down like that. So images /suggestionPage background.png. I want it to be a no repeat. I want to center it both directions, and I want it to be fixed. And this takes a little bit of work to figure out what you want for an image. It depends on the type of image background you want. If you want it to be cascade, or not cascading, but repeating, where you can repeat in the X direction or the Y direction. You could have it zoom in and out and do all our cool stuff. But this is going to ensure that our background always has our image on it, and that our image does not stretch. So we're not going to run out of image. We're not going to have a stretched image. Instead, what will happen is we'll zoom in and out if necessary. Otherwise, it will cut the picture off if necessary as well. It's a background. And again, we want the background size to be cover. And the height needs to be 100%. So that took some playing to figure that out. And a lot of the CSS, just so you know, I'm going to explain it, but it does take a little bit more of an advanced understanding of CSS in order to grasp some of these concepts. Some of it's just, hey, this works. I can use this until I can figure out why it works that way. But I would encourage you to go deeper than that when you're learning CSS, when you want to actually use it for your job, because the fact that knowing this works but not knowing why this works can be a scary position to be in when it no longer works and you have to figure out why. So just note that you want to try and figure out why these things work or don't work. I do have the Foundation in Web Development course that goes over CSS in depth that will be helpful. Now, some of the things we do here are going to be basically, hey, I'm telling you to do this because I know it's going to look right. And it's not always going to be as obvious at first why we're doing it. But what we're going to do is, this is the end result of me playing around with CSS for about a week. And I didn't think that recording a week of me tweaking something, going back, changing it, tweaking something, going back, changing it, tweaking something, I didn't think that was necessarily helpful to you. Now, the other side of it is it makes it look like I can just rattle these things off like I know exactly what CSS to apply everywhere. And that is far from the truth. Okay? This takes a lot of work to get right. And what I recommend is that you start small and just start tweaking, and then make some more tweaks and maybe get the big things out of the way, kind of like this. These are big things, big chunks, and then start slowly dialing into other spots. So I'm going to put a few things to dial into other spots right now, and then what we're going to do, in fact, let's just do one, which is the H1, but I know that I need the padding top to have 1 rem. Again, 1 rem, if you're not familiar with rems versus EMs versus pixels, if you want to get into more CSS, you really should understand these. So I'll give you a brief overview. 1 rem essentially says the base font size, which is 18 pixels, equals 1 rem. And then if I were to say 1.5 rem, what that would be is 18 pixels times 1.5, which would be 27 pixels. And that would be the padding top. Why we do that instead of saying 18 pixels is because the fact that if we change for, let's say, a mobile device, we change the font size, maybe make the font size a little smaller. Well, then everything, all the paddings, everything else that uses rems will also shrink at the same ratio. So it can be very, very helpful for resizing your entire page. Now, rems versus EMs are slightly different. I tend to always use rem unless I have a really good reason not to, because EMs can get you into trouble because they take the font size from the container, which might or might not have a font size. If it doesn't have a font size, it keeps going up until it finds a container that has a set font size. And if nothing else, it goes all the way to the top and grabs the 18 pixels. But if you put a font size on the container later, it's going to mess up everything else inside, because now that container is a font size that it didn't have before, and now everything that uses EM will base off of that ratio instead of the parent ratio. So it gets a little squirrely. There are times when it's useful, but I find that most times I just default to rem unless I have a good reason not to. So that gives us the basis for the major changes to our page. We have our new fonts, we have our background image, and our H1s are formatted a little better. Let's run this and just see the changes applied and just see how it looks now compared to what it did last time we ran this thing. Okay, so right away we can see the new font size is, well, first of all, let's reset this. There we go. The new font size is much more bold, and we have this background here. And notice if I scroll, the background doesn't change. And if I were to change the ratio of the page, notice it zooms in here, and maybe you can only get like the hand and a little bit of the book here. But if you scroll or pull it out, now you see the laptop and so on. And if I were to shrink this, notice the image doesn't shrink. And if I were to grow this, the image doesn't grow. It's always going to be fixed in place around the entire page, regardless of the width of the page, regardless of the height of the page. So that for us is about the best we can do for a background. That background is, I think, perfect what we want to do. You can debate if you like the image or not. That's not the point. The point is that we have this background that's fit in place. We don't have any weird edges to worry about. Now, once we get this all formatted in place, we're not going to see most of this background because we mostly covered up with our content. But for now, we can at least see what this is. The big deal of background is not to pull the focus away from the foreground. Okay, so we want to have something in the background that is kind of evokes this idea of working with computers or in some way be technology related. But notice it's all just blue tones, and the focus here isn't on making a really cool, pretty background that draws your eye, but more kind of blends into the background and eventually won't see much of it, but at the same time isn't just a solid color that's boring. So that's the goal here. So with that, we now have the new font for our text. That's the Roboto, and this font up here is the Montserrat. So our formatting is a little nicer now, and we're gonna start next on laying out this page so that it actually has a more of a structure to it than just stacked up everything in one spot. Now let's start working on the structure of this page. So by structure, I mean we're going to go to the index page, and we've got a bunch of divs that have no classes attached to them. We're going to attach classes to all of these. We're going to use some bootstrap styling to kind of rough in the various shapes. And then from there, we'll work on actually styling these things with custom styles after that. So let's put the classes on here that we need to. So we'll start the H1, and we're going to say this is a page heading. And we'll say text uppercase. This is actually from Bootstrap. What this will do is we'll take this text right here and make it uppercase. The page heading is going to be a custom class. So we'll have a mix of custom classes and Bootstrap classes. Our custom classes aren't in CSS yet. We'll go ahead and put those in later. So we also want a margin bottom of 4 on our training suggestion. So MB4, that's from Bootstrap as well. Now, in this div, we're going to say the class equals, this is a suggestion container. And then we'll have a class, some classes on this button. So this also raises the issue, though, this button doesn't do anything. And we needed to do something. So let's also wire this up on click equals LoadCreatePage, which we don't have that method yet, but let's go create that method so we actually have something in place to go somewhere. So let's come down here and let's just put it right here. Private void LoadCreatePage. And if the logged in user is not null, then what we'll do is say nav manager navigate to create. But if you're not logged in, you shouldn't go to the page that says create because you don't have access to it. So nav manager dot navigate to, and we'll say Microsoft identity / account / sign in. And again, we'll do the true here for saying we want this to be a forced load. Okay, so now that fixes that little glitch there. We didn't have, we skipped over the on click this button. And now we can start putting classes on this. Class equals, and we're going to call it suggest button. Suggest BTN, but we'll also apply the BTN and the BTN-outline light and BTN-LG for large, and also make this uppercase text. So a lot of classes here, not as much as you'd get with some frameworks, but like Tailwind is very class heavy, but we still have a lot of classes here. And so let's talk through these. This is a custom class that we're creating. That's why I flipped it around. Instead of BTN-suggest, I said suggest.btn, just so I can kind of know that, oh, that's my custom button class. BTN comes from Bootstrap and applies some standard button look and feel to things. And then the outline light does as well as making it large and setting the text to uppercase. So these are all Bootstrap classes, and this one is going to be mine specifically. With that, we have our button formatted. Let's move on down to the suggestions here. So this right here is a row. And that means something in Bootstrap. A row is allows us to designate these things go together, and then inside there we'll have columns. And you can't have more columns that are in a row, but we'll try and focus on just keeping it in one row if possible. Suggestions count, that's our own. Then call MD-4. That's saying that, hey, this is going to take up 4 columns out of 12 at the medium breakpoint. And then we're going to have text light and margin top of 2. So this margin top of 2 is a relative sizing. It's also based off of, I believe, rems. It comes from Bootstrap. The text light is from Bootstrap. This is from Bootstrap, saying it's, again, 4 columns at the medium breakpoint. Below medium, we don't have a specified size. Therefore, we'll use all 12 columns. But from medium and above, we'll use 4 columns. So this is that top row is going to have how many suggestions we have, and then the buttons for new or popular, that's toggle buttons. And then we'll have that search box as well. So it's going to put them all in a row, essentially. So next up, we have this section. So class equals, and again, this will be a call MD-4, but we're also going to say that call XL-5, meaning for an extra large screen, we're going to have 5 columns instead of 4. And this is a BTN group, and that will group these buttons together. Next up, we're going to style these buttons. Let's do it before the on-click. and we'll say btn-order. And we're going to have a identifier that tells us when to highlight these as being selected or not. So in order to do that, we're going to write a method called SortedByNewClass. We're going to say true. So what this will do is it will say, hey, if we're sorting by the new class, then return yes, because this is the new button. And we'll do the same thing down here. Let's grab this whole thing right here, and we'll paste it down here. But this one is order by popular, so false. So that will allow us to style our buttons based upon which one has been selected. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and copy this, and then we will come down and put this in place. So I don't believe we have this already done for us. I think we avoided doing anything with styling yet. So down here at the bottom, let's put in our private string, and we'll have that sorted by new class, bool is new. And in here, we're going to have an if statement that says if is new equals is sorted by new. So we're going to compare, hey, you say you're the new one if you say true. Is the is sorted by new also true? And if it is, then we're going to return the sort selected class. But if not, then we're going to return no class. So that will return for us the class sort selected, which will then highlight that button and say, hey, this is the one that is currently selected. So let's go back to the top here, and we have our buttons now have the proper classes. So you can come down to the next section, which is our search box. And we're going to say in here, class equals call-md-4. Notice the 4s all line up. So 4, 4, and 4 for medium. That equals 12. That's going to use the whole width of the page. But also notice call XL is 5. Now, what does it mean for this first one since it does not specify XL? Well, if we don't specify anything, the medium and above will all be 4. So 4 large and 4 extra large. But for this one, we said, yeah, 4 large is fine, but we get the extra large, make it 5. So here we have to kind of pick up a slack. So we say call XL-3. That will again allow us to equal 12 total. And this is going to be a search box. And for our input, we're going to have a class. Let's put it here where we have a little bit of space. Class equals form control, which is a bootstrap item. And then rounded control. And that will allow us to properly format the box, make it look a little nicer. And that's all for this section. Now, before we go any further, let's just run this. It's good to see our changes in action, and just this structure itself is going to change how our page looks. Now, we haven't formatted to look nice yet. My custom classes aren't in place. But notice the suggest button now looks a lot better. And we have 5 suggestions, and then we have new and popular over here. And we have the search box, looks a lot nicer, has rounded corners, and it just looks nicer. So this all stuff still works, and now if we click suggest, we can actually go to the suggest page. That's nice. But this is just with structural changes using bootstrap styling, we actually have something that looks a little nicer. So we're getting there. And if we expand the page, notice the size of search box, and then watch it get a little bit bigger. It actually shrinks down. That's that change from large to extra large. Okay, and then as it gets smaller, at some point they're going to stack. Notice that? So they were next to each other, 5 suggestions, then new/popular and search, and now they're on top of each other because of the fact that we are below our size of medium. So that's how the columns work, and that's how it's going to start to make it look a little bit more like a real page. So we can keep going, but like I said, I'm going to put my own classes in here and start styling these. But for now, even just the Bootstrap structural styling, it is still styling, but it's the layout stuff and stuff like that. Even that styling is making our page look a lot better. All right, next up is this section down here. This first thing, class equals row. Here we're going to say class equals call MD 8 and call XL 9. So it's going to, by default, be 8 columns wide for medium and large, but then for extra large, it gets a little bit wider and takes up 9 columns. And then we'll start styling our classes. So we're styling our divs, class equals suggestion entry. And then we have down here a class called GetVoteUp. I'll show you this. Class equals at GetVoteClass and pass in our suggestion, which we don't have yet. So let's copy this and then let's scroll the bottom. Whoops, a little fast there. But let's scroll the bottom there and let's get our class, our method, private string GetVoteClass, suggestion model, suggestion. And this is a way to apply or not apply classes based upon your data. So this vote class here, remember there's 3 different states we have. And if you pull out that document with our formatting or styling, you'll see that there is the click to upvote option if you have no votes, in which case it's got a gray background. But then if there has been votes on an element, then you see it's more a white background with blue outline. But then if you have personally voted on something, it's going to be a blue background with white lettering. So different options based upon the different scenarios. So if suggestion.userVotes is null, and actually we can just shorten this, is null dot count. So if it's, oh, nope, we cannot shorten it. So if it's null, or if suggestion.userVotes.count equals 0. So we want the null or we want the count to be 0. If any of those is true, we're going to return suggestion entry no votes. That's a little long, but it explains exactly what's happening, and so I'm going to leave it that long. Else if suggestion.userVotes contains logged in user, if there is one, their ID. If so, return suggestion entry voted, meaning you voted on this. Else, the only other option here is return suggestion entry not voted. So those are 3 different classes we're going to apply, one of based upon the value of the user votes. Whether there is no user votes, in which case no votes. If there is user votes and we have voted on them, or if there's votes but we have not voted on it. And that allows us then to, again, style the class right here, which wraps all 3 of these elements. It allows us to style it in a way that is different based upon the data. Next up, we're going to come to this top text here and say class equals text uppercase. This is a really convenient class because you can just apply it wherever you want, make the text uppercase without having to modify the actual text itself. So I do have a little bit of custom styling on this that I let go. I just said style equals and applied it. Font size of 3 rem. We're going to leave it for now, but this is a quick and dirty fix. Normally I don't say apply these, but this quick and dirty fix worked for now. We'll come back to if we want to change this into its own class. But there is our styling for our caret pointing up, which will allow us to see that hey, they have, this is an opportunity to vote on this item. Okay, next up we have class equals suggestion entry text. And again, this is a custom class. And then down here on our div, we can say class equals suggestion entry text title for our suggestion. And then right down here, we have our details. I'm sorry, that opens the details. We have our category name. A little confusing there, but class equals suggestion entry text category. So I'll format our category. Our category is going to be at the bottom. It's the gray and a little bit less obtrusive in its look. And then we have our status name. So in this class, we want to format the outer class first, where we'll say class equals suggestion entry status. And then we'll also get a class for this, GetSuggestionStatusClass for this suggestion. And the reason why is because if you have a suggestion status, then that status will imply a color, and the color will be different based upon the status. So we need to figure out a way of doing that. We're going to come back to this in just a minute. I want to finish this one last div. Suggestion entry status text. So we'll form the specific text as well. This is a bit of a tricky one. This is one where we rotate the text on 90 degrees and we put it inside of a rounded end and we color the background and so on. So let's grab this, and what we're going to do is we'll create a method that returns which class to apply based upon which color it should have based upon the suggestion itself. Let's come back down to the bottom. And we'll say, let's scroll down more so you can see it. Private string GetSuggestionStatusClass, suggestion model, suggestion. And we're going to have an if statement up top. First, check to see if suggestion is null or if suggestion.suggestionStatus is null. So if either of those is true, if the suggestion itself is null or if the status of the suggestion is null, then we want to return the suggestion entry status of none. And this will be the most common result of this method call, is that you won't have a suggestion status. Most don't. So you'll get a status of none. However, if that's not the case, if there is a suggestion status, it's not null, then we want to get that status. So we're going to say string output equals suggestion dot suggestion status dot status name. Switch. Now, if you're not familiar with this, what we're going to do is we're going to take this text and create a switch expression off of it. And we're going to say, if it's completed, then I want you to put the value of suggestion entry status completed in the output. I'll put a comma, and we'll do this a few more times. So let's copy and paste this. Watching, upcoming, dismissed, and archived will all be there. And we'll have one more for the discard. You should pretty much always have a discard. And that is the, what if you don't find something in this list that matches? Well, in that case, return the default, which in this case is going to be none. Now, let's change these. Watching, upcoming, dismissed, and we actually don't have an archived. We used to have an archived in our statuses. We don't have it anymore, so I'm not going to include that. The archived kind of changed. We used to have a status called archived, but we decided instead of having a status called archived, we have a whole separate flag for it because of the fact that it's hidden. It's not something that we're going to say, oh, we archived it, but it's still in the main page for some reason. So that's why it doesn't get its own color. All right, so with that, this is going to return back for us a string into output. So yes, these are hard-coded, but again, we control the fact that these are created. We do not allow a person to manually create their own. If we decide that we want to allow admins to add statuses, then we'd have to go back through this code and figure out how to change the code to properly assign new classes because the color will be different as well. Speaking of which, we're going to change this to watching, upcoming, and dismissed. And then finally, return output. Now I could have just said return right here, but it puts in a separate variable for us so we can actually inspect it if we want to debug it. So that is the GetSuggestionStatus class that's going to apply to all of our suggestions and color them if they have that need because they have a status. Otherwise, they get the none, which is a transparent or a non-color option because it has no status name and all the rest. So with that, we can go back up and look at where we left off, which is we just did the GetSuggestionStatus class. We did finish up basically the whole virtualized section. So now let's come down to the next section, which is the categories. And we'll say the outer div says class of call MD4 and call XL3. And this is going to display our categories and statuses to the right of our suggestions. So the div here, class equals categories. And then for the span, we'll say class equals text uppercase. Sound familiar? And also font weight of bold. To the category name itself. And then for the all right here, we're going to say that the class equals, not glad, class equals at GetSelectedCategory. Now, we don't have that method yet, but what this will do is going to match on our name. So it's going to match on all here and say, hey, do we have a match here where the selected category is all? And if it is, then we're going to display this in a bold manner as opposed to not bold. That way you can kind of see visually, oh, we've selected this category over that category. So let's copy this, and we'll go down to the bottom again. And really simple method, private string GetSelectedCategory, string category equals all. That's the default. And we'll say if category equals selected category, return selected category, else return nothing. Now, since we're already here, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it one more time. Get selected status. And we'll say status. And we'll say status and selected status. Like so. And we'll say status here as well. So same thing, we're going to have to apply that soon for our statuses. Might as well create now while we're here instead of waiting to do it and come back later. Then I can scroll less for you. I try not to do too many scrolls if possible. Okay, now we have the get selected category. What that will do is it will look at whatever category we're in. Right now we're in the default, therefore we don't pass anything in. But we're going to look at it and say, hey, does that match what's selected? And if so, we're going to bold that by applying a custom class. Otherwise, we're not. We can make it a little bigger if we wanted to. We could highlight, we could change the background. We could do a lot of cool stuff if we wanted to, but that now gives us that freedom and flexibility. Let's take this class. We're going to apply it, don't forget, on every entry as well. But we have to pass in the c.category name into our call here. So that will say, okay, this is the, I don't know what category it is, but dev questions category. Is the dev question category the one that's currently selected? If so, then that's the one you apply the class to, not the all. So that'll work for all of our categories. And we'll do the same exact thing for statuses. So div class equals statuses. It's a custom class. And then our span, we're going to have class equals text uppercase and font weight of bold. Both of those are bootstrap classes. If you're not familiar with bootstrap classes, go to getbootstrap.com. Look at the documentation. It's awesome. It'll really help you out in understanding what's going on. Okay, for this div, we have a class equal to @getSelectedStatus, just like before with category, and we're going to copy this, paste it down here, and we're going to pass in this s.status name for the parameter. So now that's all the structure of the page. It's the entire structure. We haven't created any of our custom classes yet, but we've at least created the bootstrap structure. When I say structure, this is styling, but it's a styling structure, meaning the layout, the columns, and the rows. So this now gives us a little bit more layout. So now we have on the left-hand side, we have our suggestions. And notice the big arrow there, that's pretty big. But we also have on the right, we have our category and status. And if I click on, let's say, completed, that shrinks down to only one entry. Or upcoming, there's a different entry. Or all, there's all of our entries. So I can also sort by popular versus new. We got a little outline there. They'll go away once I unselect something. And I can do a search as well that limits. So everything works. And we've got a little bit nicer of a styling, but we're not quite there yet. We have the the structural layout of our style, meaning we have our columns and our rows, but it's still pretty ugly. It's getting better, but it's still pretty ugly. So that's what we need for basic structure. Now we'll start working on the various elements on this page to make them look nicer.